everyone, welcome. My name is Emily Bray, and I have been a creative writing teacher for a decade. And so today I want to talk to you about showing versus telling in writing. Whether you are a seasoned novelist or you are just starting out writing, you have probably heard this term showing versus telling, but you may not actually know what that means. So let's talk about it. So what is showing versus telling? And what does it matter? Showing versus telling is all about getting more information to your readers in a way that doesn't feel like a big info dump. So why showing versus telling? Well, let's look at a couple examples and see if we can figure out what we know. So I always explain telling as a summary, that we're looking at something and you are telling me what it is. A boat. It is a boat. That's all the information that I've gotten. And that's not a bad thing sometimes. Sometimes we just need to know it's a boat. But often when we're writing, we want the characters, the vibe, all of that to also shine through. So with showing, we're taking our readers from like up here in the stratosphere looking down at a boat, and we're putting them right in the story. So we're giving them access to what is it that the characters are really seeing, what is happening, what's going on, and we're combining all of those things together. So for showing, the large sails rolled on the edge of the harbor finally coming into view. Well, now we know what that boat looks like. We know it's not a rowboat. We know it's not a raft. We know it is a big ship, so that helps. There's a lot more description there. The reader gets to become part of the story because it's happening. The sails are rolling in, and even though it's in technically past tense, it's still close enough that the reader, it's like it's just happened. But then we can also start getting some in-depth understanding as well. We get the tone and mood the author is trying to get across. We can see it better. And we can also start hearing the voice of the author, the narrator, the characters. All of those things kind of start becoming combined and making it a lot easier for the reader to process everything. As I always tell my drama students, audiences are dumb. And I don't mean that in a mean way. What I mean is, you know what it's supposed to look like. You know everything that's up here. The reader doesn't. So you have to let them in. So let's look at some more examples of telling versus showing. So the house was old. So description. You're telling me the house was old. I can imagine an old house. But your old house and my old house might not be the same. So you telling it to me doesn't mean that I'm actually understanding what you're trying to say. So if you show it to me, I not only get a better description, but I also start getting how we're supposed to feel about it, right? So the paint peeled whenever I touch it. I can start feeling that. I can imagine that. What does it look like on the walls? Even though you haven't told me it's patchy and crusty and gross, I can start imagining that because the paint's peeling off. Flakes of faded yellow added to the dust that covered the scuffed boards that shrieked whenever I stepped. Now I'm imagining wood floors with scratches in them and, very old, very lived in space. And the house was old. My grandma's house is old. It has red shag carpeting, but it's welcoming. It's fun. It's kooky. This house gives me the vibe of like, ooh, ghost story, creepy, definitely not something I want to mess with. Let's look at another example. So emotions are a really great time to show versus telling because it gives us a lot of information about the characters, both the character who's feeling the emotion and the character who's observing the emotion, and a lot about their relationship without having to come out and say it directly. So he was mad at me. Yeah. We can kind of start imagining what someone looks like when they're mad. But again, that may look different. So when you think he was mad at me, you might think screaming, scowling, yelling. But let's look at the showing here and see if that matches up. He refused to look at me in the eye. His torso turned ever away. Mumbles cascaded from his lips. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew I probably didn't really want to. So now we have a very clear description of what this anger looks like. It looks like the silent treatment. It looks like turning away from them. And that might be really different. So that tells us a lot about that character, that they're not a scream angry kind of person. They're a turn away kind of person. But it also lets us know that the character who is narrating this also understands that person. They know they're angry even when they're not screaming. They know they don't want to hear those words, even though they can't hear what they're saying, because they know them. And that tells us something about their relationship. So not only did we learn the character was mad, but we learned something about the character. We learned something about the character observing the character. And we didn't have to say it directly. We didn't have to say, this is how he normally acts. Because we know that. Because the character knows that. So one of the greatest things about showing, I think, is vibe. Let me see if I can, there. And I came across this on this author's, I want to say Twitter. It was a while ago. And it was How to Write a Horror Story. And it's all about how description and vibe help us to set a tone where if we just told people what we were looking at, we would not get that at all. So How to Write a Horror Story. So I'll read this one out loud. See if you can think about what they're talking about. I get up before anyone else and I hear them. Not close. They're talking to each other, not me, in a language I don't understand. They live in the trees. They have always lived in the trees. I just can't always see them. Sounds creepy. Sounds cool. We get a vibe that there's like this language happening that we don't understand. And what is this author talking about? They're talking about birds. Cardinals, these lovely red birds. But because of the way they use their sentence structure, the way they used everything, we have this idea of vibe, of tone, of mood, and that helps us to engage, right? If you just told me about there are cardinals in the trees when you wake up in the morning, it'd be like, cool story, bro. But when that vibe is there, it really brings that reader in. So let's see my example. So this is my try. Their skin is rough, ashen, sunken tight against the edges of their skulls. The larger the cavity created, the older they are, older than me, older than my grandmother, ancient when you look them in the eye. Carefully they reach towards you, grasping. Your entire world becomes them. Transfixed, you hear their piercing cry and you can't move. Any guesses? An elephant. And actually, that's true. The older an elephant is, the more their skin kind of sinks. And so that's a cool fact I learned when I was in an elephant sanctuary in Thailand, where I took this picture. But again, we have a description, right? Rough, ashen, sunken tight against their edges of their skulls. But we also have more than just the description. And showing can be that. It can be more than just see, touch, smell, taste, whatever. It can also be repetition, syntax, right? Syntax being the structure of a sentence, like grasping being its own sentence, definitely gives a vibe. So all of those things are important, which takes us to the difference between description and showing. And that's the next level, because often when we're introduced to showing, and my students do this all the time, I did it when I was in high school, and we hear showing and we hear detail and we do, okay, I can see this, I can smell this, I can taste this, I can touch this, I can, whatever the other sense that I forgot was. And we make this really big, like, focus on this tree. And we spend a page talking about the bark on this tree, but we don't actually learn anything. So let's look at a description of, let's say, this boat. The boat was large. It had many portholes in the side of the hull. The sails billowed in the wind above them. The sea air was sharp. The white birds called to each other from the top of the mast. That's in the moment. We're there. We hear the gulls. We smell the air. We see things, right? But we're not finding anything out about the character, the vibe of the story, the narrator. We're just finding out about this boat. But I don't know how I should feel about this boat. Do I care about this boat? Do I not? So let's look at showing version of the same boat, where we are connecting the description of the boat and the character's reactions and the character's thoughts and feelings together, so that we're not having info dump character. We're blending them together subtly. He hadn't expected the boat would be so massive. It towered over him, and for the first time, Jackson felt his stomach twist in knots. The scream of the gulls taunted him, and Jackson kept looking at the portholes. Whether he was looking for a friendly face or ghosts, he wasn't sure. The salt in the air grated on his newly shaven face. He contemplated turning around, but the snapping of the sails commanded that he step onto the boat. You have the same information there. Big boat. Portholes. Loud birds. Sails. And salt air. We have all the same things, but now we're getting, how does the character feel about them? How is the character reacting to them? And with those reactions, we start getting a vibe, right? We start feeling a little bit nervous about this boat. It's so big, and it's making him feel nervous. Maybe I'm nervous. The gulls are screaming, and he's looking for a friendly face, so he doesn't have them around, or a ghost. And maybe because he's nervous and scared. We have the salt air is grating on his face, that's newly shaved. I don't know what we're going to do with that information, but we know something about him, that he is old enough to shave. And the snapping of the sails commanded, right? So we're getting a lot more vibe, a lot more, all those things. And it's more interesting than just reading a description of a boat, at least for most people, I'm sure. So it's time to look at your own work. Drafts are always works in progress. Everything is always a work in progress. At some point we say we're done, but it doesn't mean that it's actually the best it can ever be. And if you look at published work, often there are mistakes in them, or there are places where you're like, that could have been better. And authors will say that, like, I had to publish it. But drafts are just getting your thoughts from your brain onto paper. And so they're not perfect. But revision is where you can start making those things happen. So if you're like, ooh, did a lot of telling, great, because you were telling the story to yourself. Now you have to tell it to someone else. But here's some things to look for. What matters? If the bark on the tree does not matter, don't spend forever on it. You can just tell me it's a tree. But if that bark, if they're like contemplating their life because the bark is peeling off like a birch tree, and they're just imagining this horrible moment in their lives where they're being peeled from their family, then tell me about the tree. If it doesn't matter, don't spend time on it. Right? There's this idea in writing that if you spend a lot of time on something, if you mention it, it better matter. Because we don't want to spend a ton of time on things that don't matter. So, first question, does it matter? And if it doesn't matter, maybe it doesn't need to be shown. Maybe it can be told or just described. There are a bunch of trees. They're big. They're tall. Especially if we've been in the forest for a while, we don't need to describe every tree. Then the next question might be, what is the vibe, the character, the plot, etc., that we're trying to get across here? And how can we subtly work those in with the description of place, with the description of setting, with the description of each other? One place I see a lot of telling in writing is when we describe people. He was 6'6" with blonde hair and blue eyes, and he was very muscular. And that's not how we describe people in our own brains, right? We think, wow, he's taller than everyone I know. Wow, he can really reach that top shelf. I wonder if he's really blonde, or does he dye his hair? Right? Those are the questions we're asking, and those are the things we want to put into showing. A great way to compare, or great way to show is to compare, right? Wow, he can, like that person can reach a much higher shelf than this character. So we don't have to say one is 6'6", one is 5'6". We can just describe how far they can reach, right? We don't need to tell they're tall. Put us in a moment where they are tall. Same with vibe and plot, etc. So when you're looking through your stuff, ask, is this a summary? Am I just telling what happened versus being in the moment, right? That first level of, am I up here just reading a summary? Am I in the moment with characters? Am I just telling bullet points? Or am I actually there as a story is happening? And last, are we describing to describe? Like the trees or the character? I am a 16-year-old girl with curly hair. Like, that's not how I walk up to people. In my head, I might walk up to people and be like, wow, their hair is so curly compared to mine. Or like, my hair is so flat compared to their, brilliant orange hair or whatever. Or man, my blue eyes, for instance, blue eyes are more susceptible to sunlight. So having a character who has really bright blue eyes kind of have a second where they can't see because their eyes are sensitive, that might be a good time to put in that they have blue eyes. Personally, and this might be a downfall of me, but I don't care what my character's eye color is or their hair color. I'm a vibe person. I have a vibe of that character, and I care more about what's going on up here than I do here, unless it's like a important plot point, like they're from a different country or they have a striking feature that people notice about them. I actually have to keep a list on my computer at all times of what did I say their eye color was? What did I say their hair color was? How long was their hair? Because those things, to me, aren't what matters. It's what matters is going on in their head. But I know that does matter, so I do keep it in there. So tell your story as if you're right in the thick of it. If you'll do, it'll feel more alive to readers. And if you want to know more, make sure you come back for more videos or find me at my website or on TikTok, Instagram, or here on YouTube.